All right, guys, Mr. Champion here. I'm with President Washington, and we're starting our second installment of Chapter 8. We're going to look at how the federal government works. Your essential question on your notes, as you should see, is how does the federal government work? In order to answer this, I want you to look at these four objectives, or meet these four objectives. List the powers of the legislative branch. Identify the roles the president fills as the head of the executive branch. 3, describe how the judicial branch is organized. And then finally, I want you to be able to explain how each branch can check the powers of the other, the idea of checks and balances. Now, you should have spent some time working on your web quest, and so you have somewhat of an idea of these objectives, but I want to fill in any gaps where there may be. Let's look at the first article in our Constitution that covers the legislative branch. The legislative branch is made up of 2 houses. Remember, in our previous chapter, we looked at the Great Compromise. So we're going to look at the first legislative branch, the House of Representatives. There are 435 members in the House of Representatives, and again, remember, this is based on population, so the amount of people you have in your state will determine how many representatives you have. And we're going to look at a chart later on to kind of explain how this plays out in terms of actual voting, in particular voting for president. In the House of Representatives, there are 2-year terms that are served by its members. They can be reelected as many times as they want, as long as the people will have them, as long as they run. Generally, what happens is those in the House of Representatives would run for several terms before desiring to go on to become senators. The leader of the House of Representatives is the Speaker. Now, what's unique about the Speaker is that if something happens to our president or our vice president, he or she would become the commander-in-chief or in charge of our nation. Now, the Senate is made up of 100 members. Now, remember, the Senate is related to the New Jersey plan. Remember, New Jersey plan wanted equal representation, so this is part of the compromise where there's 2 per state, and so we have 50 states, hence lends us to 100 members. They serve 6-year terms, and the speaker, or the leader, of the Senate is our vice president, so he kind of presides over the Senate. And so in total, we have 535 representatives in our nation. Here is a chart of kind of a bill getting started and then moving to become law. So it starts in our House or our Senate, it moves into a committee where they kind of discuss and go through various hearings about the particular bill, and then once they kind of establish it, they put it to the floor, and then it's debated. And so as the House debates and the Senate debates, they have to come to some sort of agreement, and this is where they take things off, add things, etc. So if they finally can come to an agreement, they send it to the president, which he has 2 options. He can sign it, pass it into law, what becomes law, or he can veto it if he doesn't like something about it, or send it back to Congress and tell them to change a few things. And if they agree to do that, then it goes and become law. If they don't, then the Congress can go through a process in which they can override a presidential veto. Very difficult, but possible and has been done. Our second article deals with the executive branch. Our executive branch is made up of our president, and also you have the vice president. And within this, which we don't think about a lot, is this cabinet member. So you might have someone who's over the education department for our nation, or someone who's over agriculture. So these are different cabinet members that might be part of the president's executive branch. Some of the duties that the president have to do are to carry out the law. So if the legislative branch passes laws, the president has to execute them or carry them out. He sets up foreign policy, making treaties, appointing ambassadors to other countries, and we're going to look later. The congressional or Congress can have a say in this in terms of vetting his appointees, etc. He's also our commander-in-chief. He's over our armed forces, and so when it comes to declaring war, the president gives the final say on that, with, again, checks and balances, having the permission of Congress to move forward and to do that. And then lastly, the president suggests laws to Congress. He grants pardons and hold special sessions of Congress. If we have this Ebola issue, if it continues to expand or becomes an epidemic or a situation within our borders that we really need to deal with, that Congress needs to take action, the president can hold a special session for this. Now, a president is elected through the Electoral College. He's given 4 years per term. He can serve 2 terms. Now, President Washington is someone who kind of set a precedent for this, in that after his second term, the people still wanted him to govern them. However, he decided he wanted to step down and give others a chance. Again, looking back to the idea that we don't want a dictatorship, we don't want tyranny to reign or one person to have power. So if you look at these numbers that are next to these states, it's based on the amount of senators and the amount of representatives. So this is where the House of Representatives and the Senate come together as we elect the president, or what we call electoral college. And so what you have is each state is given these amount of electoral votes. And so if you look at Texas, if a president wins Texas, he has 34 votes. If a president wins Colorado, he has 9 votes. Now, each one of these presidents has won a particular state, but the president that wins Texas has more electoral votes, and again, is in the head and in the lead or head in terms of the voting. So this is why you see various types of campaigning throughout certain parts of the country and certain states. And we'll look at red state, blue states later on when we start looking at individual presidencies, etc. Our third branch of government is the judicial branch, basically our Supreme Court. They establish if things are constitutional or unconstitutional. Most of our federal courts fall at the district level, and so again, this is within particular states. You have district courts where they see cases or try cases based on the people. Again, this idea of giving states power. But if there are cases that are brewing up throughout our country, they get pushed up to the Supreme Court. Only a certain amount or a handful of cases get seen by the Supreme Court. Most cases are seen in district courts. If a party disagrees, what happens in, say, at the lower level of court system, they can appeal, and they go before what we call the appellate court. And then if things aren't settled there, it can get moved up until we get to the higher court, or the most high court, the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is made up of a Chief Justice, kind of the main person, he or she, that's in charge, and 8 other associate justices, given a total of 9. If you remember from your web quest, you saw and got to meet some of our Chief Justices that are currently sitting or presiding over the Supreme Court now. Their job is to be the final court of appeals for our nation, and the Supreme Court determines if something is unconstitutional or constitutional. As we look at the various court cases that are going through, whether it's issues of marriage, those things go before the Supreme Court, and they'll be a final court of appeal to say whether those things are constitutional or unconstitutional. Here's just a quick snapshot of what we kind of talked about in terms of the amount of years each of these positions can serve, and how they're elected, and what are the requirements. We'll look at that further as we get into to look at our section on citizenship. All right, our last section on our notes, checks and balances. Now, what's the purpose of checks and balances? All right, it's something we call separations of powers. All right, this prevents any particular branch of government from having most of the power. Let me give you some examples. You have the president. All right, he can check Congress by vetoing or rejecting any of the bills that they pass. Now, the Congress can check the president by looking at his appointees, whether it be ambassadors or persons who we want to sit on his cabinet, and kind of vet them, and so he can check and see who the president is putting there. And even treaties that the president passed, we'll look at those and see if those are in the best interest of our country. And then finally, our judicial branch, as we said earlier, they can determine things are constitutional or not. So the president and the Congress may agree on a law or pass something, but the judicial branch has the final say and say, hey, this may not be constitutional, so we might need to look at this, or it might get struck down. Now, what I want you to do is go ahead and summarize what you've learned by focusing on essential question and our objective questions. Once you've done that, go ahead and submit that into Moodle. Remember, you get your credit and your points for your summary as you submit it in through Moodle. And then lastly, study over your notes, go over your notes, and be prepared for your quiz. All right, look forward to having a discussion in class tomorrow.